Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm. I'll be your host, and today I'm joined with my good friend Phil Weiss. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Kirk, how are you? Have a good weekend?
Yeah, it was great. It was at a family wedding this weekend. I haven't been to one of those in ages. Forgot what those are all about. But it was nice. It was outside of Chicago, down in it was out in farm country. So drove 2.5 hours outside of Chicago through nothing but cornfields to get to this beautiful spot. And the wedding was nice, and it was nice to see family. And it was a quick there and back again. But yeah, it was nice. So that was my weekend, and I think I got 4 hours sleep on Saturday, so that was nice as well.
That always helps.
Or Friday. That was Friday. I got 4 hours. But anyway, yeah, it was great. So glad to be back. Glad to be doing the show here on a Monday morning. And how was your weekend?
It was good. We had a rarity because our house, it was just my wife and I. So we actually had date night on Saturday night, which we don't get too often when it's just us. It was nice to just have a little bit of time like that.
Yeah, I forgot what that's like. Our date night is walking our dogs together. That's our date night.
Or a walk around the block, right? Those kind of things.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's about it. That's all the time we got. Better than nothing, but that's what we got. Well, let's just dive right in here. So, so big news last week. The Fed came out and surprised a lot of people, even though the market was pricing it in correctly for the first time in I can't remember when, because the market didn't seem to budge much. But yeah, the Fed came out and they dropped rates 50 basis points, and that's the federal funds rate. And they dropped it 50 basis points to where are we now, Phil? What's the range? Is it 475 to 5, or is it 5 to 5? No, 475 to 5, right?
Yeah, I think it's 475 to 5. I think that's right.
Yeah. When they throw in the range, I always get confused which side of the range. I'm just thinking of it as 5. So, it's for decades of doing it one way of just having a single number. They put it in a range, and now it's just harder to remember. 2 numbers, it's a lot. Anyway, so 475 to 5. The big news wasn't just that it was dropping 50 basis points, which the big news was I said one rate drop this year, and apparently I was wrong because they also talked about dropping it another 50 basis points for the year end. Now, I don't know what I missed in the data. I know they should have dropped rates 25 basis points, but I didn't see the data which suggested 100 basis points in the next 3 months. I didn't see that. I didn't get the memo, didn't see the data. So things must be. So the first thing that hit my mind is, WTF? How bad is it? That's what's running through my mind right now. How bad is it that you went from doing nothing all year to just saying, oh crap, I got to drop it 50 and I got to drop it another 50 before the end of the year. Now, I can understand. Now, I was talking to my business partner who gave me a good rationale. He didn't give me this before the rate cut, but I'll give him credit for rationalizing after. It was a logical thing to do because the question was, well, should they have dropped it in August and then September? Or because you can't do it in October because of the election, and I guess you could do it technically in November, but maybe you do, maybe you don't want to. But you definitely can't do it right before the election. That would be a little too close, even though 50 basis points September, I think, is a little too close to impact the election. It kind of does in a way. But anyway, August would have been the better time to do it. But they didn't because supposedly the data didn't support that. Now, if you're naive enough to think that the Federal Reserve doesn't have access to data that we don't have access, or they have access to data that we don't have access to, then you're smoking something I want to smoke. Because the Federal Reserve has access to anything they want. Because they're the most powerful financial institution in our country. If they want something, they're going to get it. And my guess is they probably have data that we don't have as well, and they're not publishing, and so be it. I don't care about that. But the point is I assume they're smarter than we are because they have better data, or maybe just more clean data than we have access to. But neither here nor there. They're starting to get scared. because they went from saying, "Oh, we'll probably drop it a little bit," to 100 basis points by the end of the year. Uh, that kind of scares the crap out of me because no one was expecting it, and frankly, the data is not suggesting it, which means they're seeing something we're not. That's what scares me. It's what's there's an interview we had recently, and so I'll use this quote. It's the dog not barking is how I'm seeing this. So the dog not barking is what is not being said that is scaring me. And so, you get normal times where they say, all right, we're just going to drop rates a little bit here and there. Okay, so be it. You're setting the tone because you dropped rates. Got it. The trend is definitely down. The Fed is not wishy washy with its cuts or hikes. It's definitely not wishy washy. Powell has never been wishy washy with his actions, um, which is good because you know what to expect. And so the expectation is they're going to keep dropping rates, and he said that pretty much with 100 basis points by the end of the year. That's a pretty strong statement. So the question is should they have dropped rates? Should they have dropped them that much, and why? So, Phil, what are your thoughts on all this? I mean, this is a big surprise. Were you surprised?
I was. It was 25 basis. It was most people were expecting it was going to be 25 basis points up until a week or two before they finally did it. And then, like you said, thought it was going to be one and done, and now they're talking about doing it, whether it's 25 in November and 25 in December or 50 in December, whatever it is, but another 50 basis points. And when I look at the data, inflation's down from where it was, but it hasn't hit the Fed's target yet. We're still above 2%. Unemployment seems to be the thing that's scaring them more than anything else because that has gone up from where it was. If I look at the housing market, I mean, I understand that house prices are still up, but that's an affordability issue. This does help affordability of housing, but I don't think that that's the reason that the Fed would drop rates because it just doesn't make sense. So I worry about the same thing you do. What is it that we're not seeing? Because the data that I see says the economy is still growing. I mean, we still have about 3% GDP growth. So it's not like the economy looks slow. It's just unemployment's the only thing that I see in the data that gives me pause for concern. So what is it that's happening? I don't know, but there's got to be something they're seeing that we're not privy to.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big question mark for me, right? And so if you're thinking about, and we've talked about this in the show a lot, that what tends to happen is with the Fed, everyone's trying to read into the Fed. What is the Fed saying? Are they saying it correctly? Like, how can I discern, the word salad that the Fed is saying? I mean, they say a lot of stuff and really amounts to nothing, right? And some of that's deliberate. Greenspan was a master at this of saying a lot of stuff, and it really amounted to word salad. Nobody could understand it. You're trying to dissect what he's saying. Here's the problem: you have the Federal Reserve. Their job in many parts is to raise or lower the federal funds rate. Um, and they do other things, but that's mainly their one of their main tools of managing our economy and our financial system. Now, the question of whether they should be doing that, whether they should exist, is a totally different question. That's not the question I'm addressing today. That is the nature of a different show, I think. But the fact is, they exist and they do these things. So the question is, what is going to cause them to change change direction or to make a decision on rates? That's ultimately the question that is being asked: is what is causing them? Now, there are times where you could argue that maybe it's the economy. I mean, or let me rephrase that. Maybe it's the stock market. Sometimes it's the stock market. The stock market's crashing. Sometimes it's the stock market, right? Because the stock market, even though it's a lagging indicator, it can be a leading indicator in some ways. And so, if the Fed is not managing that, like if you look at COVID, the stock market crashed. It could have been much worse. Should have been much worse, but it wasn't. The Fed stepped in with more or less a unlimited guarantee, if you will, by saying we're going to buy everything and anything we have to. Of course, they didn't have to do anything because they just said that and people knew it. And they said, all right, Fed put, we're going to jump in and buy everything. So, sometimes rate cuts are to support the stock market from crashing or failing. That's one piece. So of course, no one says that this is part of their mandate, but let's be honest. The stock market crashed 60% tomorrow. They're going to jump in and cut rates. That's just the truth of it. Because the stock market does impact the rest of the economy in terms of, sentiment, right? People think that, oh crap, the world's ending. They're not going to spend money. And companies aren't going to spend money, people aren't going to spend money, and it's going to turn into a deflationary spiral. So their goal is to support the economy, support the stock market, all of it. So there is, even though they won't say this, it does exist, right? And you have to assume it exists because it lines up historically with changes they've made. The other question is unemployment. And of course, interest rates impact the banking sector. So there's lots of different things, and then of course there's inflation, right? Last but not least, inflation. So inflation has been declining, but it's been declining for a while. So the argument should be, well, why didn't they lower rates earlier? That's the question, right? If inflation was the reason, why didn't you lower rates before this? It's an honest question, right? My suspicion is that they don't really care about inflation. They care about the other factors because inflation is going to do what it's going to do. Now, they are concerned. They don't want a rebound in inflation. I know that every Tom, Dick, and Harry writes a newsletter is talking about inflation returning because they want to stoke fear in everybody. I've been saying for months, I don't think inflation's coming back. Initially, I came out on the show a few years ago and said, we're going to have a whipsaw effect. Inflation's going to go up, it's going to come down, and it's going to come back. And I've changed my mind months ago because I started to notice that inflation wasn't really coming back. I looked at the data and realized that, the reason it's not coming back is because the reason my thesis of why inflation was really there, right? It wasn't printing money. That's part of it, but it wasn't printing money. That wasn't the core of the inflation problem. My thesis was it had to do with the supply chain and globalization and things like that. And the printing of money was a very small factor. And I think the challenge is that technically printing money equals inflation, but the reality of it in practice right now is not the same. So my thesis was we had inflation. Yes, they did print a lot of money and gave it to people, which does cause inflation, but that happened really quickly. But the challenge was supply chain. You couldn't get your stuff, so people just started charging more. They had to pay people more to get the stuff because otherwise they would have sat in their homes. Like all the stuff we talked about in the show years ago happened and causes prices to rise. And then you had deglobalization where we weren't, doing stuff in China anymore. We're outsourcing to other countries, which raised the price. Some of it was back home, some of it was in other countries, but the price started to go up because the labor wasn't as cheap as in China. So, point being, inflation was because of that, not because of money printing. Technically, that's the definition, but the impact on asset prices was not due to money printing. And I'm going to explain why either this show or next show. When you see it and understand it, or hear it and understand it, it'll make sense. So the big question is, what is really driving the Fed's decision? Well, it's not. It is inflation in the sense that Powell doesn't want to be Burns; he wants to be Volcker. But I think, in my opinion, he's whipped inflation given current information. I want to be clear: if things change, I have the right to change my mind. But given what's going on now, I don't think inflation is coming back in a large degree. I just don't see it. It's just, we're very low right now. I don't see it coming back. Maybe it bumps a little bit, but there's nothing to cause it at the moment. So that's the big question, right? Is what are they looking at? Unemployment. That's probably a part of it. That's starting to pick up a little bit. inflation, not so much, right? And then stock market. Well, if they were doing it because of the stock market, then they're blatantly manipulating it before the election. However, I don't think that's the case. I think that the Fed is scared. You don't make a statement of 50 basis points now and another 50 before the end of the year. You don't make that statement unless you're really concerned. You make the statement, all right, doing 50 and we're going to wait a while, see what happens. That's what I thought they should have done, given the data that we have and given what they've said. That's a tall order. So the only thing worse than saying that is what they did January 5th, I think it was, of 2000, where the Fed came out without a meeting and just said, we're cutting rates today. That's worse. And we know what happened after that with the tech bubble bursting. But that was worse. I can't imagine something much worse than 50 basis points and another 50 before the end of the year without alluding to that at all before that. I guess technically they did in January, like in the beginning of the year, they said, oh, we're going to do it, a full basis point before the end of the year. And then they just batched it at the end of the year. But they can say that and not do anything. That's very common. Is inflation getting you down? Do you feel like your money is worth less every time you open your wallet? Is shrinkflation frustrating you at the grocery store? Well, I have an answer for you. We're giving away free money. That's right, I said it, free money. I feel like I'm not doing my part to create inflation. Why does the government get to have all the fun? What could be better at increasing inflation than giving away free money? No, I'm not an employee of the Federal Reserve. And no, I'm not an employee of the US government either. And no, I am definitely not printing it myself. But it's free. What more could you ask? Well, you might ask, is it real? Well, yes, it's totally real. I'm holding it in my hands right here, see? Oh, wait, this is a podcast. You can't see it. Either way, I'm holding it in my hands right now, and I want to give it to you. If you want some free money, go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money to get your free money today. Follow the instructions and I'll send some to you. Enjoy your free money today. I'm not the Federal Reserve, so I only have a limited supply. This offer is good until I run out. Go to www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money to get your free money today. So I think that was interesting. What are your thoughts, Phil? Where do you think the inflation is coming from?
I definitely think that supply chain was huge because goods weren't available. And the other thing that made that even worse was that we had such a switch in the economy where people that were working in offices were now working at home. And I remember reading stories talking about how companies had to totally change how they produce things because I'll give you a simple example. The toilet paper that you get in an office building is different usually than what you use in your home. But the same line can't make both. So they had to convert the line to make more for residential use than commercial use. And so that just added to the supply chain. And I remember one of the summers, I think it was in 21, when we still had a lot, and when all this was going on, and being in Savannah, Georgia, and looking and seeing all these ships just loaded with the containers and stuff that was coming in. But it wasn't like they were just unloading them rapidly because there just weren't enough people to take care of it. So that was the other thing. They didn't have the workers to do a lot of that. So there were a lot of supply chain effects. And to me, that was the initial effect was definitely, to me, the idea that they gave away money, right? So that gave people money to spend. They needed it. They spent it. But that wasn't the overriding, the big factor. The big factor was definitely, to me, the supply chain issues because of all the shortages that we had. I remember used to be you could negotiate for a car. And then during a lot of that time, you went in, it's like, nope, this is our price. And you say, well, can you negotiate? Nope, this is our price. Take it or leave it, because there just wasn't enough supply. So I think that supply chain was a huge factor.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm bringing up a chart of shipping just because I think it's interesting. I don't look at it all the time, but here's a Here it is. I got to turn it on. I do this frequently, right? I'll turn it on. I'm talking about something. You guys are like, what are you talking about? All right, here we go. So here's a shipping chart. You can just pull it up. It's pretty easy to find, but I just Google search live marine shipping, and this will come up. But the white areas are the ocean, right? So you can see the countries. So basically, it looks pretty normal right now, right? This is a normal shipping chart, right? This is a global. This is kind of where things are going. Obviously, there's a lot of shipping right here. But point being is this is normal, right? There's ships going everywhere, right? And we don't have the same. I don't have a chart in front of me, but obviously there was a time where shipping was dried up, and this was pretty much empty. And it was like all the ships were like centered around here and certain areas, and they just weren't moving. But this is a good way to to kind of look at. Let's pull this thing up here. But that's a good way to kind of look at shipping. You can also look at air traffic. You can see all this data now. It's actually pretty cool to be able to look at all that data and see where things are going. Now, you probably won't be able to discern much unless you're looking at every day and taking snapshots every day to see where things are going. But it's relatively normal now, which means that things are back to normal and ho hum. So, I mean, what do you think the Fed's going to do for the rest of the year, Phil? Like, do you think this is just talk? Do you think they're just, chin wagging here to try to get the election in the favor of a certain candidate, or are they scared, or why do you think they're making that like additional 50 basis point statement? That was a strong statement.
It was. I don't think that it's certainly not the norm for the Fed to try to impact the election. So I don't think it's that. So I'm left thinking that they're worried that unemployment's going to continue to rise. And maybe that GDP growth is going to start to slow as that happens. I mean, that it kind of, if you think about it, that kind of fits, right? If unemployment rises, there's less people working. So what are the consequences? There's less goods produced, so that can lead to lower GDP growth. So usually the Fed doesn't deviate a lot from what it says when it's close. Like you said, at the beginning of the year, they could say something and that can change because a year is a long time. But we only have 3 more months till the end of the year. It seems unlikely that they're going to deviate from the path that they've announced, because the market doesn't like big surprises. And if you think about the fact that whether they say it or not, some of their actions are impacted by or tied to what happens in the market, it seems unlikely that they're going to go back on that. So I feel like the Fed thinks they're concerned about unemployment, and I guess the related impact that would have on GDP growth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I'll point out I make this statement a lot, and I'm going to keep making it because everyone needs to know I was wrong. I thought we would drop one rate drop, meaning 25 basis points. This was 2 and 1, so I consider that wrong because I predicted 25, and that would be it for the year. And apparently, I was wrong. Right? I can't read the Fed's mind, so I'm making predictions on the show. And so I point this out because frequently we're all wrong. I was wrong. I made a mistake. Well, I wouldn't say it was a mistake. I made a prediction and it was incorrect. A lot of people make mistakes. And, we're going to adjust going forward so that it's correct. Now, what I just said was I admitted that my prediction was incorrect. Now, we all make predictions every single day, right? I predict that it's going to be sunny out, or maybe, and it's not. It's not sunny out. It's a nice fall day, but it's not sunny, right? I predict that the Red Sox are going to win. Well, they didn't the other day, right? So we all make predictions about things that either are true or not true, and we really are not equipped to make good decisions about the future. Well, let me reframe that. Predictions. We're not, as human beings, we're not equipped to make good predictions about the future. None of us are. Sometimes you have a little bit better chance than the rest. And I would argue that and I'll actually make this quick sub point, not to deviate from the other one, which is if you're really good at predicting the future, it means you have a better lens on reality than others. It means you can understand life better than others. Because if you can predict well, it means that your lens on the world tends to be accurate, right? Because the way you're seeing the world ends up happening the way you're predicting it. So the people who are predicting tend, if they're successful, they tend to have a good lens on life, and you should talk to those people because it means they know things about life that you don't, or at least their framework on reality is better. Because if you predict presidential elections and every time you're wrong, it means that, well, first I want to meet you because I want to do the exact opposite of what you say. But being wrong all the time is just as good as being right all the time. Because if you're wrong all the time, then I want to know you because I'm going to do the opposite of what you do. But point being is understand that we're not good at predicting the future. So the fact that that's true should tell you that as an investor, you should know that about yourself. And any sort of predictions you make are normal because we all make predictions about the future because we have to. That's how we choose our actions. As we think about the future and say, all right, how likely is this to be true? How am I going to act in this case? Right? So we have to. But that being said, that we're making decisions about the future, we need to know that and admit that we're wrong. Because if you don't admit you're wrong, then you continue to make mistakes. Let me give an example. I invest in Acme rockets, right? The Roadrunner and the Wile E. Coyote. I'm going to invest in Acme rockets, and I think it's a good investment at this price. Okay, so I buy it at $50, and then something bad happens. It goes down to 40. Oh well, all right. So I lost a little bit of money, lost 20%. Okay, but it's a better price now, so I'm not going to sell it. Well, then it goes to 35. Well, it's definitely, but you know what? I'm going to buy some here because it's a better price. And it goes to 30 and it goes to 25. And you just keep jumping on it. Oh my God, it keeps getting better. Look at the price. It keeps getting better. Well, what you don't realize is there are reasons it's going down. It's because everyone else is jumping out because they see something worse than what you see. You're just saying, oh, it's fine. And then the price goes down to $5 and it never comes back. That can happen. Doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen, which means that you're screwed. You just lost a lot of money. And it also means you're wrong. And you, from the time it was at 50 down to $5, you couldn't change your mind. And if you don't change your mind, that's one of the worst things you could do because your ego is telling you, I'm not wrong. The other people are wrong. I just have to wait it out. And it's your ego negotiating with you and saying, no, you're right. It's what we call hallucinations, right? It's what ChatGPT does. It's what the AI is doing is hallucinations. We do it too. They're hallucinations. You're hallucinating reality. You're trying to create reality that doesn't exist, right? It's like basically you're coming out and saying that everyone else is wrong about the price. I'm correct. So I'm going to wait till it comes back so I can be correct. It's silly when you think about it, right? And I'm pointing this out because we all do it. Even myself, I know it. I'm telling you about it. I do it too. We all do it. We're human beings. That's normal, right? I don't want to get into politics, but it happens in politics all the time. Like people just hallucinate reality. They negotiate with themselves something that's really stupid, and they're like, well, it's not that bad, right? Because my team is going to win. We all do it, right? So the key is to understand that about yourself. If you don't understand it, you can't fix it. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to help you fix yourself. Like be better prepared with mental models so that you can correct midstream, right? I could always be wrong. I make predictions on the show because I'm looking at the data and I'm seeing what everyone else is seeing, but I'm looking at it and trying to dissect it differently, right? So last year, all the financial institutions said that rates were going to drop between 7 and 12 times, which is one a month. It was ridiculous. I was correct in the sense that I was on the other side of the table. We're probably not going to, lower. They were going to lower rates. Did I say raise, Phil?
No, I thought
Maybe I said, anyway, I meant lower if I said raise. I'm trying to think. It's having a brain fart here first thing Monday morning. And so lowering it 12 times. I thought they wouldn't lower it at all. Maybe once was my prediction. And so, okay, they did a little bit more than I thought, but it's certainly not 7 to 12 times. Now, if they do that in the next few months, all bets are off, and I'm going to go live in my cave with my guns and gold and MREs. Okay, if that's really where things are going, then we're going to be beating each other up in the streets with bats in the zombie apocalypse. I don't think that's going to happen, right? So now we do have an election coming up where a lot of people think there's a civil war, and a lot of people think that that things are going to blow up in this country. I think that is a non-starter. I think people are a little bit too hyperbolic. And frankly, if that's what you think, turn off the news. You'll be more rational in your thinking because the news pollutes your mind with propaganda. If you don't think so, then you probably shouldn't listen to the show because the reality is that the news is basically it is high grade propaganda, and you could argue whether they're doing it for nefarious purposes or not. But let me walk you through it because I'll explain how it got to this place. Some people think that it's nefarious, and in part it is. There are some nefarious parts, but also we did get to this place. And there was a time where media was not as much propaganda. It's always somewhat propaganda because there's government powers that have influence. That's always the case in every country. But there was a time we had the Walter Cronkite times where people trusted the media, and it was more or less trustworthy, right? Of course, there's times where they maybe they're a little bit flexible with what they say or don't say, but generally it was pretty trustworthy. Now it's not at all trustworthy, and here's why. So the media has basically they had a monopoly on information back in the day. I don't really recall exactly when this changed, so I'm not going to try to make a determination on the date. But way back 70s, even the 80s, media was more or less trustworthy. And then somewhere along the line in the 90s, I would say in large part because of the internet, the internet delivered information for free. So Phil and I used to pay for stock charts. We used to pay for research reports. We used to pay for data. You don't have to pay for that anymore because it's free. Because everyone has it. Everyone has access to it. So it's free. But we used to pay for it. You used to pay for the media in watching advertisements because you had to. Because if you want to know what's going on in the world, there's only 3 stations to watch. It was before cable, right? It was 3 stations, and you watch the news. You could choose your station, but you're watching one of those. And so that's what was going on in the world is what you saw on the news. And the newspaper. People read the newspaper, believe it or not. They had these newspapers. They killed trees. They poured a bunch of ink on it, and we read it. That was back in the day. They didn't have this thing called Google and the internet. That's when they had payphones.
What's that?
Answering machines at your home, just in case you weren't home when someone called you. Like we live in the dark ages. VCRs. Anyway, so back then things were different, and the media could get paid, and they were more or less a loss leader. It was just kind of more of like a trophy asset that people owned, but it wasn't really a profit center. And then what happened was the internet came out, and all of a sudden, you didn't need to watch the media anymore because everyone was the media. Phil was the media. I was the media. This podcast is the media. Like people started reading blogs instead of the news. They started listening to podcasts instead of the news. And so all of a sudden, their 350 million viewers have dropped. Because why would you watch the news when you could listen to this podcast? Where Phil and I are going to tell you a different shade of truth than the news is. We know it's BS. I don't know if I'm always right because I don't have access to the same data that the government has or the Fed has, but I'm going to tell it to you straight because I don't have any bias. I don't really care. You could take what I say, leave it. I don't really care what you do with it. I'm here to educate. I'm here, just like Phil is. I'm here to educate, and I'm here to enlighten people on how to think about things. So am I wrong? Yeah, frequently, every day. That's what my wife tells me. So, so she's my marker of truth, I guess. But point being is, if we're looking at data, we can all be wrong. So understand that the news is propaganda. Some of it is because they're wrong. Some of it is because they're trying to get your eyeballs. How do you get your attention? Well, here's a media trick. How do you get somebody's attention? There's 3 powerful ways to get somebody's attention. You know what they are, Phil?
One is to make it loud, be loud, right? Like broadcast what you're saying, like that. Like think about the stock news channels, right? Like when there's bad news, not only do they talk about it, but they make it loud to try to grab your attention and make you listen. That's definitely the one that I always think of.
Okay, that's definitely pushing up the emotion. What else? What are the big three? There's big three. Everyone should know this, but I'll educate the public if you don't know this. All right.
You'll
So
have to educate them.
okay. All right, that's fine, Phil. That's fine. I study this stuff because I'm fascinated with this. All right, here's the big three. Here's what gets if you want to know what's going to get your attention. There's three things that are going to get your attention more than anything else. First, sex. Second, violence. Third, I don't remember what the third is. I'm just kidding. No, sex, violence, and novelty. Got to see. I got to get your attention there, right? A little
Yeah.
pregnant pause. So, sex, violence, and novelty. So, here's the thing. We all know sex gets people's attention. Let's be honest. You know, Madonna came out with she was a good singer. She wasn't the best singer, but she was a good singer. But what she was really notable for was the sex that she brought to everything. Right? It's all sex appeal. Back then, like the movie Meatballs. Was it Meatballs? Porky's. Porky's. That's what it was. Yeah, Meatballs is another movie. Porky's was the movie. It was like I remember watching it as a kid. It was like an R-rated movie. I'm like, ooh, we're gonna see boobs. Like back then, like you didn't see any of that stuff on TV. Like it just wasn't accessible. And so, you know, as a a young boy, impressionable age, I was like, oh, let's go watch this. So, and then by the way, there was a scene where it was like a nudie bar where girls are topless. That was the boob scene. Anyway, so it was like a big deal because you didn't have access to that stuff. Now it's everywhere. Everyone was like, whatever. Just like there, it's on TV now. I'm like, it's another boob. You know, whatever. You see it all the time, right? But back then, it was like grab your attention, right? And so in our culture, right, and it's different in Europe because I've seen broadcasts where it's like people are nude, no one cares. So I guess you get desensitized to it, but the fact is that's one of them, right? Sex grabs people's attention. Somebody's having sex in public, you're going to see it. You may not watch it, but you might be like, wow, that's really interesting. The next one is violence. This is what the media does every single day, right? Violence gets people's attention. And if you think you're better than this, when's the last time you drove by a car accident and you didn't look at it? Of course you are. You're rubbernecking it. You're like, wow, I wonder what they're doing. You're curious, right? Violence. People watch violence. You can't turn your way away from it. Why do you think when they start up the news, it starts with like death and destruction, despair? Oh, here's a fire. Here are 3 people that died. Oh, this person got, kidnapped. I mean, it's all violence. That's why they get your attention, because they want to keep your attention. Why do you think CNN became CNN? It's because they basically transmitted 24 hours a day news. And back when they started was the Gulf War. Remember that, Phil? Like that's when they became big because they were 24 hours a day Gulf War news. And like, why do I need to watch this 24 hours a day? Like, wonder what's going to happen next. Well, someone's going to die and there's going to be a rocket shot off here. I don't know. Like, what do I care? But people couldn't stop watching it. That's how CNN got its start, was because it was always on all the time. It's like, oh, wonder what's going to happen next. Nothing's going to happen next. But you can't turn away, right? And then there's novelty. What's novelty? It's something different, right? It's something, that you haven't seen before. But that's what grabs people's attention. The media, that's why the media uses violence. And so it didn't used to be this way, but it is certainly now. And so the media started losing viewership because you didn't need it. You could listen to the podcast. You can watch them. You read a blog post. So no one watched the news anymore, or people stopped watching the news. I haven't watched it for 25 years. I haven't watched it forever because it's useless, frankly. And it is propaganda. So if you want to brainwash yourself, watch the news. If you don't want to brainwash yourself, stop watching because you're not going to miss anything. I get all the data I need. I don't need to watch the news. And so other people are doing the same. And so what happens is the viewership or readership go down. So what do they still need to put butts in the seats. They still need to pay people. They still need to pay the bills. So what do they do? Well, we got to get clickbait. So they use the internet and they start doing clickbait. Here's who died today. You want to see who died in your town? Watch the news. Whatever they used, right? They're just clickbaiting you. And so they've gotten really good at it. It's a science, by the way. I've studied this. It is a science of getting people's attention, and they are very good at it. They've hired some really smart people to get good at it. And effectively, they're grabbing your attention for stuff that's nonsense. Don't believe me? there's a skit, if you can look it up. It's Jon Stewart did this skit back in 2001, I think it was, when there was a guy in a plane, and he was, it was the first time it happened since September 11th, and he was kind of losing his marbles. I think he was off his meds. I think that was the truth of it. So here's what happened. They're like, "Oh my God, someone's trying to carjack the plane or hijack the plane," and like every news station was coming. "Oh my God, it was the end of the world." No one knew a thing. They were all guessing. And so Jon Stewart did this skit about this episode on the plane where everybody's like, "I wonder what's going to happen. I wonder if he's got a bomb. I wonder if he's got a bomb. Oh, I wonder if if he killed somebody. Oh, maybe this is a terrorist or whatever." And there was every guess under the sun, and no one had any idea. All the stations were guessing, and 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 they were all saying like, "I wonder what's going to happen," but we don't really know. But here's what we think is going to happen, and it was like they were just totally making it up. And Jon Stewart did this montage of all these news anchors saying this. It was hilarious. It was just pointing out the fact that no one knew a bloody thing, and yet they were all guessing, and they were making everybody crazy that this was the next terrorist event because, and they didn't know. They guessed. So that's not news at all. It's basically entertainment. So if you want to know what's wrong with the media, it partially is entertainment. At least the Daily Show, or I forget the other guy's name, the liberal guy on HBO now.
Bill
Not
Maher.
not
Bill
Bill
Maher.
Maher. Bill Maher is actually an interesting guy. There's another guy, I forget his name because I haven't watched him in a while. He used to be brilliant when he was on the Daily Show. Anyways, he's a Brit. But anyway, so you got those guys are very liberal in their opinion. It's fake news, right? They say it's fake news. But yet they talk about the news, right? So they're making fun of it. It's biased because it's politically biased because they're politically biased. But it's not really like it's fake news, but you do it for entertainment, right? So at least it's entertainment, but it does brainwash you because you think it's true, right? And it's funny, right? So if you look at that, and I don't watch Gutfeld, but I think that's the rights version of this too. But I haven't watched that in ages because I thought it was just a little bit too left, like this Daily Show and this other guy. I'm going to draw a blank on his name, but anyway, Bill Maher's obviously lefty, and he's a comedian, just like Stewart, and so they're not biasing. Bill Maher's a lefty, although he's actually shading more right now, which is very interesting. But or more in the center. Let's say more in the center. But point being is all of this is brainwashing you. Right, the media is doing this deliberately because they're trying to get your attention. They're trying to get your attention so you have eyeballs, so they can sell advertising to you. So this is all truth. This is all the way things are working. If you think that your media is the correct one, like MSNBC or CNN, if you're on the left, or if you're on the right, you think Fox, they're all lying to you. And it's in part, I don't know if it's deliberately devious. It may be now, but because there's other players in there. But the fact is it's not really the news. They're trying to get your eyeballs so they can sell you advertising. That's the truth of it. Now, how it got there, I know how it got there, but why it got there, there's people have these theories. Oh, it's the CIA, it's this, it's the left, it's the right. That may be true. At this point, it's anybody's guess, and it's all pollution anyway, so I just don't pay attention to it. But you should know that this is how we got here. And you should know that it is propaganda. And we've seen that in the last 4 years. Like a lot of stuff's come out. Even the gray lady, right? The New York Times has come out and said they were wrong a few times on stuff, and they've admitted that they were incorrect about like the Hunter laptop story, right? They wouldn't even entertain it during the election, which I get. I'm not faulting them for that. I get it. But the point is you have these esteemed institutions that everybody says, oh, well, they're never wrong. They're wrong. All of them are. That's just it. You have to bake this into your head. All of them are wrong. They're all biased now, and they all want your eyeballs. So the next question is, well, how do I get my information? It's a good question. It's taken me years to create my own network of information of people that I look at it as, are these people being truthful? They may not be correct, but are they being truthful? So some people are really good at gold. They understand gold very well. So if I want to know about gold, I'll listen to them. Good or bad, right? If I want to know about, nuclear, if I want to know about growth stocks or value stocks, I know they're biased. A value stock investor is biased towards value. Growth stock investor is biased towards growth. That's okay. But I listen to them and say, all right, I have to discern if they're being too biased or not. And I have to discern, like, is what they're saying valuable to me? Or is it just more much of the same? Like gold people always say the same thing. No matter good times, bad times, oh, buy some gold. You have to understand that about gold bugs, right? But there are times where they might point something out, which is interesting. And so I listen to them because I want to hear if there's something I haven't picked up somewhere else. So that's how you have to get your own news. You can't just go listen, be lazy and listen. You have to find good parties. Like I like some parts about what Joe Rogan has said in the past is he's pointed out some people that have skewed from the norm, right, during COVID. He came out and he apologized, and you could say whether it's responsible or not. That's a totally different question. But if I'm looking for information, I want to find these people on the edge and say, what are they saying, right? I don't know if they're right. And be clear, I don't know if they're right, but I at least know that this is a data point that I'm paying attention to, right? There was a great interview on Tucker Carlson with Casey and Callie Means about food and our basically the food health that we have in this country. It was a brilliant interview. If you haven't seen it, I would listen to it. And it's not about Tucker Carlson. I know some people on the left don't like him, and I don't really care either way, left or right. But I'm saying listen to what the Casey and Callie Means say. And so it's very interesting. And she's a Stanford degreed surgeon, I believe, like top of her class, like really smart woman. And then just decided to throw it all away and focus on food health. Like it's somebody you should respect in her decision because it's a very hard decision for people to make. So I would say, okay, this woman is not biased because she threw away all her early life in her medical background to do the right thing by people in this country. So you could say, okay, I want to listen to this person. Maybe she's crazy. I don't think she's crazy, but maybe she's crazy. You could make that argument, but I still want to listen to her. Whether I believe her or not, it's up to me, right? It's up to you. But I like listening to that because it helps me put into context the range of where reality is. I'm not always wearing a tinfoil hat, but I got one right here just in case. And so you have to think about the information you're getting and how you're going to discern it. And you have to make that decision. It is an active decision. If you want to put in your mind good food, right? Good information, good data. You have to constantly be filtering it out yourself. You can't just lazily be watching the news and be like, and just parrot what somebody else said. You can't. If you're going into this election and you're parroting what they're saying in the news, they're lying to you. You just know that. So it's okay if you want to be lazy about it, but it doesn't mean it's correct. So anyway, that's kind of a bigger picture topic, but it applies to the financial industry as well. I don't want to monopolize. I want to give Phil a chance to talk too, but you have to understand that the financial information is the same. Wall Street's lying to you. They're clickbaiting you. The investment banks, the brokerage firms, the analysts, the government, all these people are lying to you and being truthful at the same time. Like you have to take their information and digest it yourself and determine whether you believe them or not. I don't believe the Fed readily, but they did lower rates. I have to believe that. That's true. They did that. Their reasoning I might not believe, but if they're saying they're going to lower it 2 more times this year, I'm not sure I believe it, but the market is going to believe it, and that's what really matters. So anyway, Phil, I'm sorry I hogged the mic a little too much, but I don't know. What are your thoughts? And we have to wrap it up in a few minutes.
I made a bunch of notes, so I'm going to
okay. Go ahead.
touch on a bunch of
Speak your
things.
mind.
So first, when you talked about those 3 things, you said it was sex, violence, and novelty. One thing, this show is called Money Tree, right?
Yep.
And people find it easier to talk about sex than they do about money too. Right. So that's another reason, like that's there. And like the money kind of takes the background because people don't even want to talk about it. It's just something I always think about. I'm with you. I don't watch any news either. Like we moved to Baltimore in 2003. I can't tell you that I watched local news more than once, and that might be pushing it. I don't want, I used to be on the financial news networks. I don't watch them anymore. I'd rather read my news than watch it because then I take that emotion out of it and it's easier for me to reason and deduce from it. When you talked about the Acme stock that kept falling, that's such a perfect example where we have to look for where I think about confirmation bias. because we only read the stuff that agrees with us. We only look at information that supports our viewpoint. It's why, as an investor, it's always important, this to me, to understand what the other side is. If you're long a stock, see if you can find somebody that's short, understand what their argument is. So then if things, especially if you still go ahead and buy it, at least if it starts to go bad, maybe now you have an idea why. You say, you know what, there might be more to it than I thought. And maybe I shouldn't just keep adding to that position as it keeps going down and down and down. I'm with you on forecasting. I tell people when they ask me to forecast, my crystal ball is both cracked and cloudy. So I do my best, but I make no promises that anything that I forecast is going to be right, because I don't have all the information. And even if I did look at the weather, right, they'll tell you there's a 90% chance it's going to rain today. That all that means is 90% of the time when we have these circumstances, it rains, but 10% of the time it doesn't. So if it doesn't rain, it's not as unusual as you think it is, because it's just based upon statistics and probability. One thing that I think is really interesting when we talk about how we make these forecasts. So I have a son that works for Amazon Web Services, and Amazon had pulled everybody out of the office. They were all over the country. When he started, they had to be at work 3 days a week. I read the other day, and I talked to him about it. Amazon's telling people they have to go back in the office. As of January, they're supposed to be in the office 5 days a week. So everybody's been saying, COVID, it took people out of the office. They're not going back. Maybe that's not true. At least it's not at Amazon. And there's other companies that have done the same thing. So maybe what we thought was happening there isn't happening as much, because there's advantages to being in the office that come with the ability to interact with other people, to have a true mentor and things like that. So there are some things that we lose. I talked to my son. He's like, I don't want to go to the office 5 days a week. Why? But I think it's really going to be in his best interest over the long term. And I think some companies are going to see that. What else did we have?
Let me actually point something out just before
Sure.
you give you a second to pause here. Here's something to note. You said it was a chance of 90% chance of rain. If you look at your weather app, I found this out the other day, which I found fascinating. It's not, when you have a percentage, it's not 90% chance of rain. It's 90% coverage. So that's the interesting part. So if it's like 50% chance of rain, it's not 50% chance of rain. It's 50% coverage of rain, which means that if you're in the area, like if they're just looking at an area, say like Lexington, saying, well, half of Lexington is going to rain, the other half is not. It's not a chance. So that's really interesting to me. Like most people don't think that. Most people think like what you said. I did up until about 6 months ago, and then somebody explained, I'm like, really? Like that's fascinating. All the things that we don't know about life because we just assume to be true that aren't necessarily. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah. The other one, when you talk about it kind of ties into confirmation bias. The idea that if there was an accident and you ask what happened, you're going to get this person's side, you're going to get that person's side, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. I'll never forget when I was 17 years old or 18 years old, and I was driving at a traffic circle in the town that I grew up in, Livingston, New Jersey. And I got in an accident. This woman cut me off. And somebody fortunately called the cops. And he asked her what happened. And she said, well, she blamed it on me. She said, like, that I hit her, that she was in the lane and I hit her. And when I talked to him, I said that I was in the left-hand lane and she did put her signal on, but she cut me off. And we looked at the ground and there were skid marks. And so when he asked her and when the cop asked her what happened and she told that story, he just told her, that's not what the skid marks say, lady. And skid marks don't lie. And he ended up giving her a ticket for careless driving, made her husband come get her because she hadn't changed the address on her license, all these other things, because at least there was proof that what I said was right, because you could actually see that she cut me off. But there's always, on any story, there's my side, there's your side, and then the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle, because we always bias the story towards ourselves. The other one I was going to talk about is the investment banks. You said how they have their own agenda, whatever. Like a lot of times when they put a buy in, if they raise a stock to a buy, the story is that they have some that they want to sell. So they're trying to boost the price so they can get a better price when they get out of it. Right. Or they have some other motivation for it because they have a relationship with a company and they're trying to protect the relationship and they don't want to say something bad about the company. So you always have to understand that when we hear these different things, there's motivations behind them. So I think that was it.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up in the interest of time, Phil. We're going over our allotment. So, where final thoughts from you? Where can people find more about you?
Sure. So, I mean, just in general, when you're thinking about all these things, make sure you look at different sources and understand what we hear isn't always what's going to happen. It's our best guess. As for me, experiencing big life transitions, I know that can be stressful. And my job is to help empower women facing new beginnings with the financial knowledge and tools they need to make self assured decisions. My firm's Apprise Wealth Management. We'd love to get to know you. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can download our free guide, How to Flourish Through Life's Big Changes, at apprisewealth.com/ebook. And you can also sign up for a blog. Thanks for having me today, Kirk. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Phil. That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, wealth manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.